Pastor Matt isn't here today. He is on a much-deserved vacation back to Kansas with the family. Just so you know, this is Pastor's Appreciation Month. And so when they get back in a few weeks, we want to bless Pastor Matt and Jen and the family. So be thinking about that. We'd like to get them a card. Not a card. I want every one of us to get them a card that we can give them all at once. Also, Pastor Matt has recently graduated from seminary, so we're going to be celebrating that as well. So just keep that in mind as you maybe you're shopping and get a card for Pastor Matt. Now, it is my privilege to introduce our speaker today. His name is Doug Meye. He is with Transformation Ministries and also now Aspire. Name change, as many of us are doing. Doug and I go way back. I mean, 100 years at least. So he's that old. No, the first time I heard Doug pray was at a pastor's luncheon. And there's something that happened, I can still see it in my mind, that Doug prayed this prayer and somehow it touched my heart like very few men have. And since then, he's been my hero. And I kid you not, he's been in charge of leadership development, a lot of different things, churches, pastors. I can't say enough good things about this guy. And I would trust my spiritual life, not just my physical life, but my spiritual life to him. So let's give Doug a round of applause here as he brings the best sermon ever. All right.
Well, it is a great privilege for me to be with you this morning. And I want to bring you greetings from other churches that are part of what is now the Aspire Network. We're excited about the future as God kind of propels us into what it means to be churches that multiply disciples on every level. Make disciples in the church, send out kingdom leaders, plant new churches, and we're so thankful that this church is a part of that network. I feel like I've been here many times before because I have. I've never spoken here, but I've been on the campus. I don't know how many times. I've been to meetings that have taken place here. As Glenn was saying, Glenn and I go back quite a while. Not as long as he suggested, but we go back quite a while. And he's such a dear man. He's such a good friend. And I just love your new pastor, Pastor Matt. I'll be sharing a little bit more about him in a few moments. But I just want you to know what an honor it is, what a privilege it is for me to be with you this morning. And this morning, what I'd like to do is to try to give you an outside understanding of what I think God is doing here, and then call you to a new commitment to give yourselves wholeheartedly to what God is doing in and through this place. I believe that this is a special moment in the life of First Baptist San Diego. I believe that it's an exciting moment, that it's a moment that's filled with anticipation. In the Bible, you talk about chronos time and kairos time, and chronos time is just that time that kind of goes along, but there's a thing that's called kairos time, where all of these factors come together, and quite honestly, I believe that you're in a kairos moment here at the church. But if you're in a kairos moment, it's going to call you to a new kind of commitment. Now, what I want to do this morning is to wrap my thoughts around 8 words that Jesus spoke. And they come to us from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, verse 38, and it's very simple. He said, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. New wine must be poured into new wineskins. Jesus was up to something new in his ministry. He touched lepers. That was new. He ate with sinners. He healed Gentiles. He did good deeds on the Sabbath day. His disciples actually did more eating than they did fasting. You see, Jesus came to give people a clear understanding of who God is and how it is that we are supposed to live our lives in relationship to who God is. But it was new. For many people, it was upsetting. And so the religious leaders came to Jesus with a kind of question that really verges on an accusation. And in Luke chapter 5, verse 33, they say, John's disciples often fast and pray. And so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking. Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? Now, basically what Jesus is saying is, I've come to make a new relationship possible. And that new relationship is really like a wedding. But in this wedding, I'm the bridegroom. I'm the one that people need to be in relationship with. But what do you do at a wedding? It's not a solemn occasion. A wedding is a time for joyous celebration. That's why my disciples are not fasting, but they're eating and drinking. And then Jesus went on to give a couple of illustrations. Luke actually calls them parables. They're illustrations that underscore how a new reality needs to have new expressions. And the first one involves a set of clothes. And Jesus said, no one tears out a piece of new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. So if you take a piece of new garment and sew it onto an old one, pretty soon that new one's going to shrink. It's going to tear away from the old, and you're not going to have a new garment that's worth anything or an old one. But Jesus also then went on to talk about wines and wineskins. He says, no one pours new wine into an old wineskin. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. And here's our words. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. You see, if you take new wine and you put it into an old wineskin, the gas from the new wine begins to bubble up. And so pretty soon, the inside begins to expand, and there's no elasticity left in that old wineskin, so it bursts. And not only do you lose the valuable wine, but you got this big mess on your hands. Now, Jesus did something new in his earthly ministry. But the risen Jesus is still doing new things today. Jesus is bringing individuals into new birth. Jesus is bringing those individuals who've experienced new birth and helping them become a new creation. Jesus is taking those who've experienced a new creation and molding them into a new community. You see, the one who said, I am making all things new, is always renewing. And some of the best work of renewal that he does happens with his church. But if Jesus is going to pour out a new wine, there needs to be a new wineskin of ministry to contain it. Now, I believe that Jesus is pouring out new wine at First Baptist San Diego. Just being here this morning, to me, is evidence of that. But as someone who's familiar with this church and has prayed a lot for this church, I wasn't sure this day was ever going to come. You see, without going into detail, there were some hard times at this church. And there were far fewer people than there are today. And the church had just gone through a failed merger, which left a lot of tension in the place. And it was without a pastor. And let me add something else. San Diego is a very, very, can I add another very expensive place to live? And so we began to think from the outside, okay, here's this small church without a pastor. How in the world are they ever going to get a pastor? How's that going to happen? Folks, never underestimate what God can do. And the first thing that God did was to bring a transitional pastor to the church, Glenn Wade, who brought along with Glenda this infectious warmth that just began to welcome people. And some old people came back, and some newer people began to come and be a part of the congregation. But amazingly, the church grew during the transition. That doesn't happen very often. And then God opened the door for Pastor Matt to come as the lead pastor. There were a number of forces that just kind of all converged to make that possible. And I remember the first time I went out to lunch with Pastor Matt. I said, this is a really winsome guy. And he cares about people. And more than that, he gets it. He knows what he's doing. And I began to have this sense of hope for what God was going to do in the future. And folks, I believe this morning you are already beginning to experience what we call a new life cycle. Now, churches have life cycles. They're born, they grow, they mature, they decline, and they die. And that life cycle eventually happens to every church. When you think about it, it happens to every living organism. But you know, there's this amazing thing that the Spirit of God can do. And one of the things that the Spirit of God can do is come into a church and begin a whole new life cycle. And he can do it when the church is on decline, and all of a sudden he comes in, he just says, I'm going to do something new. Now, I believe this church is going to use, or is starting a new life cycle. Or to use biblical language, Jesus is pouring out new wine. And I'm really excited about what's going to happen in the future here at First Baptist, because it's already happening. But Jesus made it clear, what? That new wine needs to be poured into new wineskins. So this morning, I simply want to share with you 3 new wineskins that I believe you're going to need to embrace as Jesus pours out his new wine. The first is the new wineskin of what we call vision. You know, a number of years ago, this brilliant statistician, and he did a lot of consulting with businesses, by the name of Dr. W. Edwards Deming, observed, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So that the results that you get from a system don't happen in spite of the system, they happen because of the system. Which means that if you're not getting the results that you want in your family, or in your marriage, or in your church, you can't blame the system. You have to say, what's wrong with the system? And if you want different results, you have to change the system. So the way that you begin to change the system is with the top, with your vision and your values. And I am so grateful that the leadership of the church has already given very serious thought to these things. And what I'm going to share with you in the next few moments is not new if you've been around here for a while. But your leadership has taken time to really talk seriously, think through seriously about your mission and your values and the vision that's a part of it. And what's your mission? And we put it in your bulletin this morning or your handout. If you want to take it out, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to do that. But when you look at it, why do you exist? You exist to help people find and follow Jesus. You want to bring people into a new relationship with Jesus and then help them live their lives as fully engaged followers of him. Not only do you have a clear mission, but you have a vision of where you are going, of where you'd like to see yourself. 10 years from now, you'd like to be a church worshiping on Sunday morning that has 800 people gathering. And the church is reflective of the community. So they're not just driving from all over, but it's actually a reflection of the community. You will have planted a new church, and you will have helped 5 churches kind of along their way or helping to plant them. And the average age of the congregation is going to be under the age of 40. You know what that means? That means that I want my grandkids to be here at this church. And you know what? When grandkids come to the church, grandpa and grandma like to be at the church as well. Not only do you have this mission, not only do you have these values, but you've got these, mission and vision, but you've got values that underscore the kind of people you want to be. You talk about we want to be a people of authentic love. We want to be a people who have audacious faith, who dare to believe God for big things. We want to be committed to the next generation in what we call, the pre-huddle or the service. Mike underscored that value. I'm sorry, not Mike. Rick, thank you, Rick. Yeah, thank you, everybody else. I know a Mike Wenzel, but you're not that guy. So Rick Wenzel underscored that, but he talked about how Moses was loved by his parents and went on to do great things. And who knows what will happen in this church as you love the kids that left a little bit earlier, the kinds of things that they will be one day do. There's transformational generosity and then selfless multiplication. And these values are so, so good, but each of them have a question that you can ask yourself to see how it is that you're doing with the values. So when it comes to the first one, authentic love, you ask the question, am I loving in the way that I want to be loved? And what I want to simply say is this. This brings great focus to where you want to go as a church. And it brings great clarity to the kind of people that you want to be. And I'm just saying, good job. because way too many churches don't have this. But you know the direction you're going. You know the kind of people that you want to be. But here's the problem. What we have as a wonderful mission and vision and values gets written down on a piece of paper so we can all read it and look at it. But too often the piece of paper just becomes another piece of paper. And when the piece of paper just becomes another piece of paper, you might as well crumple it up and throw it away. Because quite honestly, it's worthless. Here's what I want to encourage you to do if you haven't already done it. Take this piece of paper home and put it in a really prominent place. And I don't know if anything sticks to a refrigerator anymore, but if you can make that work, stick it on your refrigerator or put it on a mirror in your bathroom, or if best thing, somehow get it on your phone so that you can see it time after time. But don't just post it, live into it. Live into it so that every time you see it, you say, Lord, let us be this kind of church. Lord, help us to be this kind of people. Lord, make the changes inside of me so that I am living out these values in my life. You see, the one who's the embodiment of staying on mission is Jesus himself. Jesus knew his mission. He said the Son of Man came to be served, or not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus would not be deterred from that. So when he was in the wilderness for 40 days and Satan came, Satan tried to get him off course. Jesus said, no, you can't do that. I'm staying right on course. After he fed 5,000 people, they wanted to make him the king. They put pressure on him. Jesus said, I'm not going to be pressured in that way. People were always telling him to go public with who he was. And he said, my time's not yet come. No, Jesus could not be detoured. He could not be distracted. He could not be taken off course. And so it was that there was a night when he prayed in a garden, Father, not my will, but yours be done. And after he prayed that prayer, he was arrested. There was a mock trial. He was beaten to a bloody pulp, and he was strung on the cross. But when Jesus hung on that cross, he was accomplishing his mission, because it was there on the cross that he was giving his life as a ransom for you and for me, and he was able to say, it is finished. And so be like Jesus. Keep the vision clear. Stay on mission. You see, just because it's a good idea doesn't mean it's part of the mission of this church. Just because it's happening successfully at a church down the road doesn't mean it's part of the mission of this church. Just because someone who seems to have a lot of influence says, we need to do this, doesn't mean it's a part of the mission of this church. And just because it's my idea doesn't mean it's part of the mission of the church. And so be like Jesus. Keep the vision clear and stay on mission. A new wineskin of vision. And then there needs to be a new wineskin of methods. You know the definition of insanity? I know that many of you know it. Someone has said insanity is what? Doing the same thing, but expecting different results. So you know what? If you fail to communicate clearly time after time, don't expect people to suddenly understand what you're trying to say. And if you don't have a way to welcome visitors who come and see you, don't expect them to come back. And if you are not sharing your faith with anyone in your life, don't expect that all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of activity in the baptismal. And if you're not making disciples, don't expect that others are going to somehow be able to invest their lives and raise up a next generation of disciples. And if the church is not getting out into the community so that they're serving the community, don't expect that the community is all of a sudden going to take notice and be so impressed with what's happening at the church. Now, Jesus did not define insanity, but he did say, if you want to see something new, you have to have new wineskins. So the question that I just want to encourage you to keep asking yourself of what are the new methods that Jesus wants to put in place here in this church that will allow us to embrace the new wine he is pouring out. I was texting with a good friend of mine a while back. This was about a month ago. And in the course of the texting, he shared with me that he had just visited a church that morning. And so I asked him what he thought, and this is his exact response. It felt nice. Nothing really stands out. I probably won't go back if I was looking for a church. I hate to say that, but it was just nice, but not really compelling. And I've thought about that a lot. It was just nice, but not really compelling. And can I tell you, First Baptist San Diego, I think you want to be a nice church, because nice churches are better than churches that are not nice. But I want to tell you, you want to be a compelling church. And you want to be the kind of church when someone visits, they go, I need to come back because of what's happening in that place. What makes a compelling church? I was thinking about it, and I think there are a couple of things that happen in the church that give animation, life to the values that you have in your statement. And the first one is there is the undeniable presence of God. And you just walk through the doors of the church and you begin to sense that God is in this place. There's a sense of holiness and a sense of bigness and a sense of joy. And there is this expectancy among the people. You really believe that God is going to show up and that lives are going to be changed because God shows up on any given Sunday. And people are going to be talking about that. I remember walking across, visiting a church once, and this big guy, I mean, he was a motorcycle big, like 6'8" guy, met me, he's all tatted up, but man, he talked about the changes that Jesus had made in his life, and it just sort of excited me to walk into that building. There's stories of life change. There's an undeniable presence of God, but there's something else that happens. There is just this unquenchable passion among the people. And so the people, they're engaged in worship. They want to lift up their praise and worship to God. When there's a sermon, they're listening intently. Maybe they're taking notes. After the service, you can see people who are moved. Sometimes people are crying. Other times they're just huddled up. Or sometimes they're just hands on each other, and they're praying for each other. But you have a sense that the church wants to be more than a nice church because it's about something that's really, really big. And you have a sense that this is a church on mission that understands that there's something important for it to do, and the people are surrendered to that. And I can tell you, friends, when you've got a place where there is the undeniable presence of God and the unquenchable passion of people, you are going to have your values this animated and alive. And God is going to be compellingly present. There'll be an authentic love and audacious faith, and the next generation is going to be invested in transformational generosity and selfless multiplication. And the church is going to be more than a nice church. The church is going to be a compelling church. And friends, isn't that what you want? I mean, seriously, isn't that what you want? Amen. That's what you want. You see, Jesus died, and Jesus poured out his Spirit so that the church could be so compelling that people would say, I've got to be a part of that. New wineskin of vision, new wineskin of methods, then a new wineskin of heart. Now, when it came to wineskins, Jesus had one more thing to say, and it's found in verse 39 of our text. And he said, no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say, the old is better. Now, I am not an expert on wines. I know I've been talking about wines today, but I ain't no sommelier, okay? So I'm not an expert on wines. I don't know that. I know there are different colors, Beyond that, I don't know if I know that much about that. But I do know one thing. I know that when it comes to wine, the old is better. That's why a 2006 Pomerol blend will sell for $5,000 a bottle, because it's an older wine. I had to look that up. I never would have known it otherwise. Google's my friend at that point. But I looked it up. But that's what Jesus had to say comes to people and their choices. He says, when it comes to change, many people are going to say, I like the old way more. Now, Jesus is not saying that this is the way it should be, but he's saying this is the way it often is. That people are going to say, I like the old way more because the old way is familiar. The old way is what I grew up with. The old way allows me to be in control. Whatever it is, I like the old way more. But can I just illustrate what the problem is with that? Let's pretend that this bottle here is wine, okay? And this is old wine. It's really good. And all of us here in this room like the old wine. So I have some old wine. You have some old wine. I poured it into separate jars before I drank from mine so that it was all, clean. But we're all drinking the old wine. What's going to happen eventually? We're going to run out of wine. There's not going to be any more. And can I say that that's what so often happens in churches? They just kind of get stuck on the old and they drink the old and they keep on, kind of looking to the old, and all of a sudden they run out. There's nothing left. And the church dies. How do you get more wine? The only way is to make new wine. Or better, let Jesus make new wine. And when Jesus makes the new wine, then you never run out. Now here's where the problem comes. You're already beginning to experience a new life cycle. And as Jesus continues to pour out new wine, there are going to be new people who come and are a part of First Baptist San Diego. And you have a vision, actually, for 800 people to be on this campus. My guess is there'll probably be some expansion and some refreshing that's going to take place, but for 800 people to be on this campus in 10 years. And that means that there's going to be changes. That means that some of you here are not going to know. In fact, you're not going to know a lot of the people who come on a Sunday morning. And it means as they begin to come on a Sunday morning, that all of a sudden there are going to be changes that take place. And in some cases, you're no longer going to be doing the job that you really like to do because someone else is going to be doing that job. And you may, after a while, begin to feel like the church is no longer my church. And when you start feeling like the church is no longer my church, it becomes really easy to say, I like the old way more. Can I tell you something? The church has never been your church. You didn't die for the church. You're not the one who's ultimately building the church. You're not coming back for the church. You're not the one who has purified the church so that one day he can present the church to himself as a perfect bride. The church does not belong to you, and the church certainly does not belong to me. The church belongs to the Lord Jesus Christ. And the church has belonged to the Lord Jesus Christ. It always has, and it always will. But here's the incredible thing, that the Lord of the church, who is building something beautiful, gives to you and me the privilege of being a part of what it is that he's doing. It says, you can help me in building my kingdom. And so I want to say that there needs to be a new wineskin of vision. There needs to be a new wineskin of methods. There needs to be a new wineskin of our hearts where we just again say, Lord, it's your church. And you know what the response needs to be when he starts building his church? Not, I'm losing my church. It's thank you, Lord, for what you're doing. Thank you that I get to be a part of it. What a privilege. You know, there's this exciting story in the Bible where Jesus actually does make new wine. And it happens at a wedding that takes place in a little town called Cana. And he turns water into wine at the wedding. Now, my guess is that many of you may know that story particularly well, but if you don't know it that well, it's in John chapter 2. You can read it in the Bible after the service if you want. But I just want to make a couple observations about it. The first thing is this, is that Jesus wanted to make new wine. He didn't begrudge the fact that they'd run out of wine at the wedding. He wanted to make new wine. And I believe that the same thing is true here at the church today. Jesus is not standing back in the corner with his arms crossed and say, hey, I don't want to make new wine for you guys. I don't want to pour anything out. You know what? Some of you have been here a long time. You kind of got into a mess. Now you got to dig. No, he's not like that at all. Jesus is able to make new wine, and he wants to do that. But what is also very exciting to me in the text is Jesus is not limited in the way that he can do that. You see, he does not need a vineyard to make new wine. Jesus was able to take water and turn that water into wine. And that is so encouraging to me because I think sometimes we begin to feel like we don't have the resources. If we just had more money, if we just had a bigger staff, if we just had more volunteers for something, if we just had this or if we just had that, something could happen. I just want to tell you that Jesus is not limited in the way that he can work. He can use water and turn it into wine. He can use 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people. He can put mud on a guy's eye and that guy is going to begin to see. Jesus has already shown that he's way powerful and able to do above what we think. You know, Pat and I my wife Pat is here this morning. I'm so grateful that she's here. But we had the opportunity to go to Great Britain a couple of years ago. And one of the things that we wanted to do on our last day was to go down to Harrods department store. That's the world's largest department store. And we just thought, man, it'd be kind of fun to walk through it. I mean, it was mind-boggling, and I won't go into the details on that. But what is far more memorable for each of us is not what we experienced in Harrods, but what we experienced along the way. Because along the way, we said, hey, you know what? As we were looking at our map and kind of walking along, it says, hey, we're in a place called Brompton. We're a section of London called Brompton. And you know what? I think it's Trinity Brompton where this thing called Alpha began. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Alpha. But Alpha is this wonderful course that the Spirit of God has used to literally bring probably millions of people to himself. It's just a course that explains who Jesus is. It helps answer people's questions. It's a great course that is used by so many churches. But here's the deal. It's not a big church. I mean, you can't even see it from the street. You have to take this path that goes back, and there's this building, and it's not any bigger than the campus right here. But friends, what God has been able to do through that church is absolutely incredible. Because God is able to take just the ordinary stuff and do this supernatural, ordinary things. That's who he is. So Jesus is wanting to pour out new wine. Jesus is able to take what's here, right now, and do something incredible. But there is one thing that's important. And in the story, Mary and Jesus have a conversation. And we're not quite sure what happens in that conversation. We can kind of read between the lines. But after Mary and Jesus have had this conversation, Mary tells the servants who are at the wedding, do whatever he tells you to do. Do whatever he tells you to do. And so one of the things that Jesus said is, I want you to take water and fill the stone jars. And we read that the servants took water, they filled the stone jars, and you know what they did? They filled it all the way to the brim. They took Jesus seriously. We're going to fill it all the way to the brim. And then Jesus said, I want you to take the water that's in the stone jars to the steward of the feast. At that point, I'm not sure that water has turned into wine yet, which means that the servants are actually carrying what they think is water to the steward of the feast. That would be an act of faith. But sometimes Jesus calls us to step out in acts of faith. It says, do whatever he tells you to do. And you know what happened? Jesus turned the water into wine. My question for you this morning is, what is Jesus telling you to do? Because he's ready to pour out this new wine. He's already doing it. But what is Jesus telling you to do? And let me just say that for some of you here, it's going to begin in a small way. It's going to begin by getting to know some other people who are part of the congregation. See, I've been around church long enough to know how life works. And it's pretty much like we come in one Sunday and we sit right over here. And when we sit right over here, we get to know a few people who sit right over here. But when we sit right over here, we never quite go over there. maybe part of what God is just saying to do is, hey, I want you to walk across the room. And every Sunday I want you to walk across the room and just take a little bit of time to get to know someone. Not just give them a fist bump, but to talk to them and get to know them a little bit and begin to pray for that person and express appreciation for them. One of the things that's going to be true if this is going to be a compelling church is you've got to be compelling people. You've got to be people in whom the presence of God is very much alive and who they're passionate about your faith. Are you a compelling person today? And some of us, and I include myself, we always need to keep growing to be the kind of man or woman or young person that God is calling us to be. But you've got great opportunities here at the church to step in and to grow. Opportunities that will allow you to take next steps of faith or grow in community with other people or just learn how to have a quiet time with God. And if you're saying, I'm not sure a step to take, you can talk to Pastor Glenn this morning. You can talk to Pastor Matt when he comes back. You can talk to any number of people that you see here on the stage, and I know they can help you take next steps. And for some of you, it's just going to be to begin to build relationships so that you can invite people to Jesus. So start saying, hey, I've got a front row in my life, people who watch me, who know me better than anybody else. And I'm going to start praying for that group of people on a consistent basis. And then I'm going to take some things to develop some kind of relationship with them. And man, there's going to be opportunities that come this holiday season. And I am going to take one of these little cards that are there in your program this morning, and I'm going to give it and invite them to come and be a part of what God is doing in this place. What is Jesus asking you to do today? What is Jesus asking you to do? What is Jesus asking you to do? What is Jesus asking you to do? One of the things I love about the story of the wedding at Cana is we read that when the master of ceremonies, called the steward, tasted the water that had now become wine for the first time, he went, wow! Wow! Now, he didn't really do that. But he did say, man, you've saved the best wine until now. And I believe that Jesus is pouring out new wine, but I also believe that he's saving some of his best wine until right now and what's going to happen in the days ahead. Would you pray with me? I simply want to ask you to linger for a few moments with the question that was that Jesus, I think, has for you. What is he asking you to do? What is he asking you to do? So, Lord Jesus, this is a holy moment. This really is the Kairos moment in the lives of individuals who are here. But I thank you so much for what you're doing in this church. I thank you so much for the new life that you're bringing and want to bring in and through the individuals who are here. And Father, by the power of your Holy Spirit, I pray that there would be faithful response in the days ahead. In your name.